Okay, so we have hour and 50 minutes. Not sure I'll talk for the whole time. There is a good chance that I will. If I talk for too long and we end up going overtime, just email me questions and I'll reply in a group, email at the end. That being said, I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it because I have a lot to talk about neg v kf. And I think the best place to start is what distinguishes neg v kf from neg v policy f. It's sort of similar to the one I gave yesterday, which is like what distinguishes critical F construction from policy F construction. One is that the advantages are unconstrained by the resolution. The advantages offered up by the K team being unconstrained from the resolution is a huge benefit, for the K team. Although it is not, typical that they're completely unrestrained from the resolution. Most K advantages do indeed relate to the questions posed by the topic, but they go further. So for instance, an example is one of the apps put out by this camp, this medical apartheid one. It has a critique of intellectual property in the context, it has a critique of intellectual property, right? That being said, the critique of intellectual property for that one goes beyond solely suggesting intellectual property is bad, to say intellectual property for the fourth time in 1 minute. It also critiques the medical industrial complex. It critiques medical anti-blackness. It critiques scientific expertise, stuff like this. So given that the advantage for a KF is usually connected to theory of power plus topic tie, they are also somewhat unpredictable and they range greatly in scope in terms of their impact as well. So you can range from small debate impact, critique of particular discourse, all the way to bigger impacts for, apps that are like extra topical. So think like warming impacts, future wars impacts, stuff like this. So the advantage ground is higher quality, it is less difficult, it is more difficult to predict, but as a result, the solvency is much more difficult to explain. This is the trade-off that I would say most KFs make in terms of having a better advantage. Solvency for these type of advantages usually leads to either a feasibility concern, like you can't explain your thing, it is unrealistic that your thing would be implemented and solve whatever you're suggesting is bad, or a presumption concern. You copy pasted a lit review, your thing has been done in the real world. There's several examples, of the one I see in practice. So I'll talk about that later on, but I would say that is one of four things that distinguishes being negative against the policy F. First being advantages unconstrained by the resolution. Second, diverse modes of solvency. TBH, I would say advantages unconstrained by the res and diverse modes of solvency are kind of, similar justification. Similar logic here. You got three-ish popular styles of KF. Really, it's two. It's like extra topical F and, epistemic F, or like F about knowledge production. So you got KF with the plan. The first, this extra topical thing is like a KF with the plan, or a KF that does a materialist thing that achieves the resolution's goals. So think alliances topic, you get rid of the alliances via a different actor is like maybe an example. The second big type of AF is epistemic KF. So it's an AF with a more formal or structural impact that is redressed by changing research or changing something with the Speech Act. So I guess the potential third AF that I'm sort of hinting at, being a type of critical AF is like the performance AF, but really it's not super distinct from other types of formal critique AFs. The only thing that distinguishes performance from, other types of AFs is the incorporation of unconventional evidence presentation. So think different, artistic forms like poetry, music, etc. So yeah, diverse modes of solvency. Sometimes the solvency is disconnected from the advantage. Sometimes the solvency is from the same article as the advantage. It is notoriously difficult to predict what the solvency for these KFs will be. That is number two. Number three, perhaps the most, I don't know, this is the one that you feel the most, perhaps. Preparation, coaching, and other stuff, Notoriously difficult to prepare to debate KFs. Coaches are weak at understanding K arguments because many of them do not read books. They have simply debate understandings of critical arguments, right? That they have achieved from either their career or from judging debates. which this does not teach you about what critiques say. It does not teach you about how to answer critiques or how to deal with the real life implications of many critical arguments. So preparing for K-teams, I would say, is what separates mid from good. You should be willing to engage in the somewhat gargantuan undertaking that is, prepping T blocks or like one link wall for cap before the tournament. The biggest misnomer is like, well, we can figure this out in the pre-round. You cannot figure it out in the pre-round. You should prepare before the tournament because, the risk is that you lose to a team that you otherwise could have beat. Last thing, biggest thing, limited applicability of negative evidence set. Because of all the above, you are usually coming in neg v kaff with less prepared to say than in other debates. Mostly because you can't just spam generics, which is like the most popular way of debating in high school, right? So in this regard, ironically, you have to engage somewhat directly with kaffs, arguably more than policy Fs. You have to say the opposite of what they said, even though stylistically and purportedly, kaffs are anti-clash. Misnomer, big misnomers, like you need multiple, 1 and C options versus kaff to be successful. I'll talk about this later at length, but I honestly think, for the purpose of preparation and for the purpose of confidence, that it is beneficial to specialize in one argument and then have your partner develop one argument that they can extend as well that can be of complementary use and maybe operate as a standalone 2NR. So think Cap K plus Academy 1NR, T 2NC plus like DA or case or pick 1NR, stuff like this. But I'll talk about that later on. I would say that is intro, like what distinguishes neg v kaff. Going to separate it into a few sections from here on out. One would be pre-tournament / pre-round for like a brief bit. And then going to go through various arguments against kaffs, starting with framework. You got the Cap K next, Academy K, case arguments, DAs, and picks. And then at the end, I'll just talk mentality when negating kaff. But going through all the common arguments, beginning with T. That being said, before T, pre-round, pre-tournament, and pre-round. Questions to this point? Awesome. Don't think I've said anything too crazy. 1 for pre-tournament and pre-round. Less prep does not equal no prep. Case negs for neg VK, much less evidence requirement than policy case negs. As such, they're more block heavy. Personally, this is highly subjective. I think block heavy case neg is much easier because less manual labor. You don't have to find cards, you don't have to cut them, you don't have to process them, right? That does mean the onus of thinking is more on you though. So as a result, you should prepare before the tournament for K teams that you will estimate should be around your bracket. You should be reasonable. You should be reasonable about who you prepare for, right? If you are not in the same bracket as the top K teams in the country, then you should not prepare case negs for those teams. One huge misnomer in K is like everybody hate watches the top K teams and they're like, case neg to Wake or something like this. But if you're not realistically going to be debating these teams, then prepare for the teams that will be in your bracket. How do you do that? Look at the past results of these teams. If you want to extend T, find out what their 2AC ATT is. How can you do this? Making friends with K debaters, watching elims, asking other debaters, etc. If you want to extend the Cap K, read the 1AC cards for lines that you can pull out, for the Cap K. If you want to extend DA versus extra TF, think about their K of the DA. All of this should be happening somewhat before the tournament. Admittedly, the pre-round, you can be doing some of this stuff, contrary to previous advice that I've been given. That being said, less prep does not equal no prep. You should also be thinking about K teams just as much as you think about policy teams before the tournament. And this is even the case if you're going for topicality, which usually renders the case mostly irrelevant, right? So I'd say that's number 1. Less prep does not equal no prep. Number 2, analyze the 1AC for K of your position. KFs are much more front-loaded than policy Fs nowadays. Policy Fs, back in the day, used to actually preempt negative DAs a lot more. That being said, KFs critique everything. You need to start reading 1ACs for critique of T, critique of DA, etc. How do you do this? You look at the language of the tags and you try to make your best guess on the function of the language in the tags, right? Ballot stuff is usually AT presumption. It's usually ATT. Rhetoric about topical debating or debate anything is usually also K of T. Language of the topic DA is bad, is K of the DA, etc. So there's not really like a hard and fast rule for what to do when like looking at the 1AC for K of your position. That being said, it'll become more clear over time, and that is the big push in pre-round, to discover what their 2AC will be to your argument, right? Last thing, ask questions about terminology that will become bumper stickers. Honestly, probably L lecture for putting this in the pre-tournament and pre-round thing, because obviously you can't be asking teams questions in pre-round. So just consider this as in round as well. You can make a bumper sticker edit. You should be more than willing to use prep in Neg v K debates to ask questions. Why? You ask them, why is this? Because you need to understand the terminology behind the 1AC, because the terminology that they're using early on in the debates will be the terminology that they use later on in the debates. Most K teams that are smart have bumper stickers for their impact, i.e. a label that dictates what their impact argument will be in the future, right? So what's worse? You ask them to define terms for 3 minutes and develop an understanding of their argument, right? Or you try to look cool by pretending like you follow, and in the process, you expose yourself by asking dumbass questions anyway. You should ask questions about the 2AC overview. You should ask questions about critique of your position. You should not ask gotcha questions. You should not respond when you're questioned back, right? Cross-X is, I think, best spent asking very basic, what does X mean? What is the implication of X argument? Right? Those are the two, things that I think are best served in Neg VK Cross-X. So that is meta advice. Now I'm going to go into specific arguments. I'll probably talk about T and the kaff K, sort of trying to gauge, the time for break, not trying to, run too long to the extent where we're ruining the break, but we'll figure it out. T framework. When should I go for topicality? Okay, you should go for topicality in one of a few situations. Most obvious situation, you have the judge for it. If you're trying to go for T, you should pref judges that will vote for the fairness impact first. Why should you pref judges that vote for the fairness impact first? Because those are the judges that are most concerned with competition, and as a result, are more likely to have a favorable evaluation of, general fairness impact, general competition framing for both fairness and clash impact versus AF impact turn. More judges than you think are also willing to vote for topicality. Big misnomer in high school debate is just categorically do not pref K judges. Big mistake. A lot of K judges are actually hugely biased towards critical arguments, myself included. Why is this? Because everybody has a high standard for the arguments that they made, just because, debaters are narcissists for the most part. More judges than you think are willing to vote for topicality, and most K judges, will vote for this argument as well. So you should be willing to pref smart K people that have a history of voting on topicality. How do you determine this? You go to the tab room and you look at the judge record. You see who they judge. It's not that difficult. 2, when the F link turns the generics that you are more well prepared to go for. If they have an advantage that has really strong interaction with the kaff K, if they have an advantage that straight turns topic DA, and you want to extend framework versus the extra TF, stuff like this. So in that world in which your specialty is link turned or otherwise, negated by the fact that this AF has an advantage that interacts with it, then you should go for topicality. Last, the type of AF that I think is best for topicality is one of two, extra topical and debate impact. I think it is less good versus performance for ethos and AF prep reasons. I also think kaff K is on fire versus performance for reasons that I'll explain later. That being said, extra topical AF, you need T alive in every speech because otherwise, essentially, they can fiat away the DA. They can do complex fiat things to get rid of your DA. So an example is, we critique nation states, therefore no US-China war impact because there's no US or China post-plan, stuff like this. So that extra topical apps are always trying to do wonky stuff with fiat. to get away from debating the disadvantage, right? So you need T in basically every speech. It doesn't always need to be T. It can be like private actor fiat, stuff like this. That being said, you need a theory argument. Okay. Versus debate impact AF is also good. AF that is like, or AF is prerequisite to topic education. Why? Because Clash straight turns all of these AFs, right? Their argument is debating about their thing is key to activate a subject formation benefit. It is key to make you a better thinker in the real world, to change, how your beliefs and, how you go about, carrying yourself in the real world in response to issues of social justice, right? How does Clash not interact with this, right? The internal link is debating about their thing is good. So let's say debate impact is good. Internal link for all of this, big misnomer, limits only. It is predictable limits. It is not simply the counter AFs under the counterinterp can say anything, right? That is a good argument. You have the limits argument, so that is like actor prolif, like USFG, non-USFG actors, stuff like this. That being said, the more refined version of this argument is that it is more difficult to predict what the AF will say. Predictable limits, thus erasing many of the negative defense, like functional limits, stuff like this. We can read negative generics, but we do not know what the 2AC will be. We do not know what the AF response is. We do not know if we can even read these generic arguments, because the 2A can decide yes, no, we'll give you the link in debate. And it gives the AF additional in-debate flexibility, re-AF condo, right? So predictable limits, critical distinction to make. I'm going to quickly talk about the fairness impacts in order of goodness. Fairness versus KF best impact. Speaking from the perspective of the K team, it is completely external from the Clash impact, right? Not so much in truth, because they have similar internal link, right? They're both based on this internal link of predictable limits. That being said, the AF can link turn the Clash impact. The AF cannot link turn the AF fairness impact. You will never have our counterinterp equals more fair debates, right? They're more likely to critique fairness, to suggest fairness is bad. So, in response, fairness is the best impact, to have external. Why is fairness an impact? Debaters want to win. What are some examples of this? Not disclosing your KF, suggesting dropped arguments are true, suggesting ballots are currency and signal the goodness of a team or a strategy. Stuff like this. Fairness is an impact akin to a D rule. It is something that everybody agrees is valuable and thus cannot be critiqued. It is something the AF even agrees with, so it cannot be critiqued. Why is racism bad? It is unfair. Why is the mistreatment of K debaters wrong? Because they are devalued relative to another group of people, i.e. they're treated unfairly. If you want to win, fairness. If you don't want to win, vote for us, because you do not care about fairness. Fairness, much more ethosy impact, much less able to be critiqued, and it is more external from the other Clash impact. Judges that are more amenable to fairness are more amenable to vote for topicality in general, and it is more strategic because the impact turn to fairness is a more untenable position for reasons that I have previously explained. That being said, Clash impact, which is the second best impact, is also good. Why is the Clash impact good? Because it link turns their impact. Duh. Their thing is debating about their thing is key to actualize it. Something about debates under the counterinterpretation activate some subjective benefit, for debaters. So in that way, I think that the function of the Clash impact, which is to suggest that debates under the counterinterpretation are actually more harmful, for achieving the thing that they're trying to achieve in the world, is still strategic. The sort of like independent impact to this, which is like skills or like self-reflexivity, stuff like that, I think these impacts are very weak. That being said, less engagement over their thing equals more ineffective advocates for their thing, I think, is pretty helpful. I would say one other thing that sort of distinguishes these impacts is same internal link, but different function of the internal link. So with the fairness impact, you're making more of a ground argument. You're making more of like, it is difficult to negate, the critical AF. When you're saying Clash impact, you're making more of a limits argument, i.e. we have more to answer, so the prep is much worse. Stuff like this. There are other impacts. All of them are shit. There's fun, completely subjective. This was like really popular when I was in high school for some reason. I haven't seen it in a while, but I just need to hate, like fun, impact. Like, what are you even talking about? Do not extend that. That being said, more popular impact is this like movements style impact, like key to actualize, I don't know, like the civil rights movement, shit like this. Very, very bad impact. Why? Because it concedes subject formation in the context of social justice. It concedes that debaters, in the way that they think about debate, does have some formative effect for the issues that the AF has said are important. So like, which do you think is like more likely to produce a civil rights movement activist? Like debater under the counter-interp or policy debater? Like obviously debater under the counter-interp. So movements equals L. Topic ed though equals good for reasons that I'll explain in a second. That is T impacts. Couple other things to talk about with T. One is interp versus counter-interp. Okay, you need to define words in the res. You do not always need to define the United States federal government. When should you not define the United States federal government? Well, if their AF is really, really state-based, which is like difficult to discern, but like if they have a big critique of political hope, if they have a critique of reformism, stuff like this. But, you can get to USFG-like definitions as a logical extension of another argument. So popular example is like a couple years ago, like the phrase enact requires action by Congress, stuff like this. To strengthen IP rights requires a court action or congressional action. So you can achieve the same function of getting to USFG without, defining USFG and linking, to their offense. That being said, that's like sort of ticky-tack. Honestly, you can debate USFG and just debate out whether or not state bad is like truly, disproves T. That's like not a horrible place to be in. That being said, tricks. You should do the DAs on the counterinterp, right? So you should explain limits not only on the counterinterpretation, but in the context of the counterinterpretation. Why is the counterinterpretation bad? It proliferates actors. It carves out exemptions for specific argumentative styles or subject positions, which creates a slippery slope, stuff like this. So you need to make your limits DA more specific to the counterinterpretation, and that is also what distinguishes mid from good. When you're debating extra T, you need to define words in the res, and you need to read 2 NC cards. Extra topicality, the AFs that do something that is resolutional and go beyond that resolutional action, or seeking, to link turn your standard. They're K-ing your definition for being less predictable or less valuable for topic education. So, versus extra topical, AFs, I think topic ed standard is useful plus 2 NC definition cards. That is, I would say, really all I have to say about interp versus counterinterp. It's just where you do the limits DA. 2 more things to consider: answering offense and answering defense. 2 big things to consider for answering offense. 2 big hitters. 1, read on neg. Read on neg is fire. It is literally like one of the strongest arguments in debate. Not really for, the reason why most people are just like, well, if you're reading a K on the AF, like you can read it on the neg. But like, really what matters is when their offense is AF education good. When the offense is debating from our perspective, teaches you how to confront, this harmful research practice that we've critiqued in the real world. So AFs that are like, our AF equals prerequisite to topic, or when read on neg is like destructive. You cannot explain an impact as to why it is violent to be AF 50% of the time when you have critiqued the resolution, but then you have centered your AF on the resolutional question. It's like, res bad, like we shouldn't debate about intellectual property. Here's our argument for why intellectual property is historically violent in the context of X community, stuff like this. So I think the impact to, AF 50% of the time is really weak. Read on neg takes care of most impact turns that are very popular in high school, which is prereq to the topic, AF education good. Other thing to consider, debate practices, not topicality. Many impact turns are observations about the world or tendencies of framework debaters. This is not a DA to framework. This is a DA to debate practices. You should dispute the link. This is the first thing that you should do. You should say DA to the world, not DA to our interpretation of debate. Why is it true that topicality, that the counter interpretation, is what compels debaters to do the violent things that you have suggested have been happening for many years in debate? spoiler alert, it's not the counterinterp, it's just, debaters and, stuff like this. So dispute the link. Then must dispute solvency. This is the general template for answering offense. 1 is dispute the link. 2, dispute solvency. You say it is worse under the AF counterinterp. You suggest it is not solved by the AF plan. Stuff like this. 3, you should suggest alt causes. You should suggest, as a result of no solvency, their impact is inevitable. Most of the time, this connects back to this original idea of DA to world, not DA to interpretation of debate. Last thing to consider, answering defense. Okay, predictable limits. This is why it was so heavily emphasized towards the beginning, right? Most defensive arguments rely on the premise of functional limits. So there are a limited amount of Fs under our counterinterp. Counterinterp their F plus our F, Counterinterp shields limits. You have ground to say against our F. You can say the cap K, you can say PES, stuff like this. That being said, predictable limits. This is why many K defensive arguments do not make sense. Your argument is, even if we can read arguments against your F, the negative cannot predict or account for pivots, in the same way that it can versus a policy team. You cannot advantage counterplan out of critique of T. This very unreasonable standard for what constitutes a negative argument under the AF counterinterpretation. Many defensive arguments are complete non sequiturs, and many defensive arguments, to the extent that they are made, undermine other arguments. What is an example? Well, unpredictability good, very popular argument. You can AFs under our interpretation equal more unpredictable debates. That's better because it's better to learn to think on your feet. Next argument, functional limits. You have this amount of arguments to say against our F. You can say cap K, you can say PES K. So which one is it? Is it unpredictable or predictable? You can't decide between these arguments. So defensive arguments also muddy other defensive and offensive arguments. Last thing, defensive arguments also weaken critique of topicality. How can you suggest that you evacuate the education that is necessary to solve your K of the topic, but then be but you can still say deterrence DA versus us, stuff like this. So it is unlikely that they can solve, their clash arguments when they initiate or it is unlikely that they can redress your clash arguments when they initiate defensive arguments. It more likely harms their offensive arguments when they initiate defensive arguments. And most of all, when you say defense to topicality, you're demonstrating that you believe debate and competition are redeemable if, this theoretical research addendum was made in the debate. By doing so, you demonstrate competition is valuable, so fairness. It all reduces down to AF cares about winning, right? So fairness. So that's what I have to say about T. Less to say about T than maybe the other stuff, and less amount of stuff on T versus the other stuff, because there's a million T lectures at this camp and a million that have been recorded. So if there are questions about that, then I'll come back at the end. I think I'm going to do cap K and see where we're at on time. If it's 10:50, then we'll call a break, but we'll see. Cap K. When should I go for it? Honestly, every debate. Cap K, best argument in debate, in my personal opinion. That being said, the real, tell of when you should go for cap K is epistemic solvency. So AF that solves via confronting knowledge production, confronting research, changing the way that we debate, speech act, with materialist impact argument. So great example, settler colonialism AF that was very popular in LD a couple years ago. That was huge impact argument, imperialism, very bad, causes, waste dumping, extraction, the global south, etc. How do we solve this? Disidentification, change the way that debaters' neurons think, stuff like this. So if your advantage is materialist, and you change it by confronting how debaters think about debate, then cap K food, every single time. What are the strengths of the cap K? I would say they're threefold. 1, alt deletes the case. Getting rid of capitalism redresses most social wrongs. Why is this? Because capitalism inflects all other social injustices. Additionally, the AF commonly makes perm in this debate. They usually say, our AF is a cap K. We were always already the cap K. We link turned your cap K thing with our one sentence neolib advantage in the 1AC. Congratulations, alt solves the case. You have now demonstrated neoliberalism is non-incidental to the 1AC, that a core premise of the 1AC is getting rid of capitalism, and that you have an impact connected to that. So the alt that gets rid of capitalism obviously solves, the link turn, and as a result, solves some of the case. So alt solves the case, great argument. Link turns the case is the second big strength of the KAPK. The impact to the link usually demonstrates some sort of disadvantage that implicates the case, be that elite backlash, labor commodification, etc. The impact to the link usually has something that will turn the case or mitigate their ability to solve it in another way. Your theory of power as well usually also has things to say about why the status quo is harmful for whatever category you're debating against for cap reasons. So this isn't really link turns the case or alt solves the case, it's closer to root cause, but these arguments all go together, right? You have like deindustrialization, wealth inequality, devaluation of domestic labor, labor super exploitation, stuff like this. You have a litany of examples of why capitalism is bad in the context of whatever they've said is also bad, right? So your alt, likely to solve the case. Your link, likely to turn the case. Your impact argument is the last reason why the KAPK is good. Why? Because you have great external impact that is very difficult to K. What is that impact? Global warming, right? Why is it difficult to K? It's both external and external. It's both external and structural. Well, it's both structural and existential, right? Causes extinction from biodiversity loss, disease, permafrost melting, sea level rise, resource wars, all this stuff. That being said, warming is also bad because it has a structural impact. The people who feel warming the most are the people who are least responsible. Coastal communities, indigenous traditions erased, as a result of climate change. The social erased as a result of climate change. Nobody wants to go outside. We're just dying in the chokes. This is an impact to the link that you can explain during the season. Definitely not. Definitely just a joke. That being said, this warming impact, very good. Other than warming impact, you have good structural impacts like precarity impact. You have war impact, stuff like this. That being said, I think the warming impact is, best for non-cable reasons. And then, you have to consider, warming impact, like how am I gonna make this a DA to the plan? Like really, like the Speech Act doesn't really cause warming, right? Impact to the link that I have previously explained, is what gives you AT perm, right? So you have this warming floating thing that the alt is like a counterplan that it solves. And then you have your link to the case, where the impact is link turns the case. So they can't suggest perm, even if you have initiated warming plus warming advantage counterplan, right? Impact to the link is the DA to the perm. It turns the case, and they agree with it because they have initiated this permutation argument. So KAPK, very strong argument. Why debate math equals KAPK equals dub 90% of the time. What do you need to know for debating the capitalism K? I'd say 3 big things. 1, link plus impact to link. 2, alt debating plus theory of power. And 3, answering DAs to the alt. So honestly, it's like not horribly separate on number 2. It could maybe just be 1 and 2. But first thing, link. When extending the KAPK, you need to know one basic premise, base superstructure, right? Simply learning about something is not a substitute for action. If you are seeking to challenge a problem that is both epistemic and material, think anti-blackness, settler colonialism. They're not just bad because of rhetoric. They're not just bad because people call you the N-word. They're also bad because there's black-white wealth inequality, housing segregation, waste dumping on indigenous reservations, stuff like this. So solvency for these material plus epistemic problems cannot operate solely at the level of, the epistemic. It cannot solely operate at the level of a change in the way that we think or research. Why? Because that leaves the material reality of the world that they have also said is bad completely intact, while training activists and training debaters to believe that they have indeed, addressed these material realities via a change in research. It trains debaters to believe that, being less racist mentally actually changes the way that wealth inequality looks like in the real world, absent, a programmatic vision for how we might redress wealth inequality. So You have, basic base superstructure analogy. I would additionally say there are two other things to consider. Political economy of the topic key as a link argument. So they K the res, they say we shouldn't debate about X. You should say we should debate about whatever, the resolutional object is. So we should debate about intellectual property. We should debate about nuclear weapons. We should debate about antitrust. We should not cede these, premises to elite capture, right? So they say K of solvency. They say K of debating about the thing. You say debating about the thing key to train activists, to confront it, right? So this turns presumption plus like res pick stuff like this into a link argument as well. The last argument, and the reason I think the cap K is the best argument in debate, is recognition politics K. Recognition politics K. Strongest argument versus virtually all critique arguments in debate. Why is this? Because many of the critique arguments in debate are divorced from the context of the original article or the original text in which they are referring to, and as a result, generate solutions that are formally liberal in that it understands the solution to holistic, problems of political economy as small cosmetic changes. What is a great example of this? Ballot K, ballot solvency. So suggesting debate holistically is anti-black. Debate holistically, is settler colonial, stuff like this. And what is the solution to this? Oh, well, we advance in the tournament further. Like, how is this not a double turn, right? The solutions that are generated by, K teams most oftentimes linked to the idea of recognition politics, linked to the idea that the solution to these problems is simply to recognize the issue as a problem, and as such, you depoliticize the resistance to more holistic issues. Instead of confronting anti-blackness in debate as a whole, you advance in the tournament as a solution. So in reality, you leave intact anti-blackness. So the book that I think is best to read for Kapke, and in general, the only book that you really need to read before the preseason to understand most Ks, Cruel Optimism, Lauren Berlant. That book bangs. It is so good for Neg. It is so good for Aff. It teaches you everything that you need to know about Ks. And many of the Ks that are being read in debate will borrow the language of Cruel Optimism, or they will just say the phrase Cruel Optimism. So that's a book that you should read. Very, very, very simple. If you have questions about it, shoot me an email. I will unfortunately be reading it for my Ph.D. this year. Okay. Alt debating and theory of power. Okay, you need a theory of power that is not flatly class first. Otherwise, you actually will get clapped to class first equals bad DA. Like, obviously. Like K of Marx. Like, thinking class matters more than race is bad. Why? Because that's facts. You can't separate race and class, obviously. That's why racial capitalism exists as a theory. Shout out Cedric Robinson. It's best and most accurate to the real world if you have a theory of power that encapsulates many of the world's social wrongs. Because, as I said previously, capitalism inflicts many of the world's social wrongs. Or, even better, just don't have a theory of power. Why do you need a theory of power for your critique argument, right? You just say links plus impact plus alt. You do not need a theory of how the world works. In fact, you're critiquing the idea that developing a theory for how the world works is an effective solution to injustice. So, you really don't need a theory of power. All you really need is the general premise that political economy is important. It is relevant to look at how politics are inflected by the economy and vice versa. If you have a theory of power, you should expand it to racial capitalism. You should expand it to a more cogent theory of how the world works. Why? Reduced chance of alt racism. So I will talk now about answering alt DAs, right? So disadvantages that suggest the alt is harmful for whatever population that the AF is trying to address. Biggest misnomer for answering alt DAs. The alt is not a movement. The alt, doesn't fiat occupy into existence. It doesn't say we should all join the communist revolution. It doesn't say we should all join the party. It is a programmatic vision of education in debate. It says political economy education is better. It suggests that it would be better if we were routing debaters towards a communist, vision of research than whatever the AF is trying to achieve. The alt doesn't institute a movement. for the same reasons that the AF doesn't actualize its plan, right? We don't do shit in debate. We just show up in debate. So they can't, many of the DAs to the alt are like, alt movement equals bad because movements equal harmful, for minority population. And it's like, well, we don't cause a movement, so not really sure why this is a DA to what we did in the debate and not the SQO, because you're using a historical example, right? So I would say that is the first thing that you should say. Uniqueness. It is a DA to the status quo, not to the alternative. Other things to say. 1, you should explain the alt's materialist conception in a way that answers the DA. What do I mean by this? You should explain the alternative in a way that avoids their DA. Just obvious. You should explain why the labor of the alt would not be forefronted by minorities. You should think through what the accountability mechanisms for intramural violence or disagreements are in the alternative's vision for the world or vision for debate. Stuff like this. So explain why alt equal not racist or why alt equal not whatever they said is bad. And then you should explain whether alt's theory disallows the DA from entering into existence. This is, in my mind, sort of an untenable argument. That being said, it is usually a round winner. It's just we read the racial cap thesis. So how can people under a racial cap alt be racist? Because you have to be anti-racist to be anti-racial cap, stuff like this. It's sort of non sequitur arguments. That being said, alt's theory disallows people under alt from thinking that it is acceptable, to do a bad thing in line with the alt DA. I'd say biggest thing though is uniqueness. Many of these are historical observations about past movements. The alt obviously does not say we should do this past movement unless you suck and you're like, well, the alt is Occupy Wall Street, or the alt is I don't know, other example. You should get rid of that. You should just say our alt is a, emphasis on political economy and debate. And as a result, doesn't have all these, formal commitments that would link to DAs. Kind of a wonky time. We have 5 minutes until break. So I think what we're going to do is go 10:46 to 10:56 break. We'll return then. And if you have questions, I can answer questions now or when we get back. But let's start our break now. Any questions to this point? Yes.
Why do you think the topic education impact is so good?
The topic education impact is not good versus other impacts. So fairness impact is best, clash impact is better. The topic education is good when the AF has suggested that debating about their thing is good to actualizing debates about the topic, because it demonstrates that debates under the counter-interpretation are better for actualizing, education that would institute anything valuable about the topic in the real world. So the reason the topic ed standard is good is because many K teams critique the neutrality of the resolution. They critique having, an apolitical stance on the resolutional question, or they critique the resolutional question as being, not a neutral one, as presupposing certain assumptions about the world. And as such, the topic education standard gives you some leverage back in the game to answer that argument, because it suggests debating about the topic is valuable.
What do you think about seeing the political arguments, if they don't have a very not an extra TF?
Definitely not versus extra T, because extra T link turns that. So extra T, which is plan plus a thing beyond the scope of the plan. So do IP reparations plus give monetary reparations, or do IP reparations plus STEM education, stuff like this. That doesn't see the political 100%. That actually seizes the political for a different reason.
Ones that don't defend a material action.
I'll talk about case arguments in a sec. See the political is somewhat weak though, because what's the impact to it? It's if you don't try to take the levers of power, then they will be controlled by bad people. It's the levers of power have been controlled by bad people for basically the entire United States, the nation that is founded on slavery. So impact non-unique plus not really caused by the AF. And also seed the political from who? Who would we prefer to have in the political? The AF is saying political bad. So it's more likely that they K your thing with an impact that outweighs it than you generate an impact that outweighs it. That being said, presumption. presumption. We'll talk about better case arguments. Also, okay, one last thing. This is like completely hater mode, but like is true from the perspective of the K team. If you say cede the political, you have shown your hand. You have shown your hand that you have nothing to say. If you have nothing to say on the case besides, condit, like if you do theory, you don't care about the government, then that's easy money for the K team. Easy money. Other questions? Yeah.
How should you win that debate as a game worth saving?
How should you win debate as a game worth saving?
Yeah.
By suggesting that they also care about saving debate. Anytime that the AF has demonstrated that they care about fairness is a reason why they demonstrate that the game is worth saving. Also, if debate wasn't a game worth saving, then quit counterplan. I'll talk about this when it comes to ethos, but like seriously, like what is the DA? If your argument is simply debate is bad, why are you even debating? That's like not such a violent thing to say because they have said debate is bad. So you're not being like, get out of debate. Like, it's not like wrong forum. It's like, you K'd debate. You K'd belonging. And then you said, solution, we should advance further in the tournament. Obvious double turn. You say, we should not care about fairness. But then you're like, they dropped that we should not care about fairness. It's like, well, so dropped arguments are true? Like, the only way that makes sense is because that is the easiest way to evaluate debate objectively in a way that streamlines decision-making, minimizing the subjective aspect of debate, right? So I would say that is the big one. They care about fairness, and also they care about redeeming debate as well. That's why they're like prereq to debates about the topic. Also, the last thing to consider, don't need game worth saving, so you don't need holistic game preservation impact. You have minimal redress of fairness in this instance impact as well. So they're like, you say people will quit, and it's like, well, we didn't really say people will quit. We basically just say you cheated in this debate, and as a result, you should lose. Why? Because you say cheating is bad. Dropped arguments are true. Yes.
What is the fun impact you were talking about earlier? Like, what does that mean?
Dude, honestly, I can't even explain it, bro. Like, it was just very popular when I was in high school. It was just like debates under our model are more fun, which like.
How do you? Arbitrary question mark?
Yes, arbitrary exclamation point. There's no answer, and it's like your fun comes at the expense of other people's fun. What is fun versus like how does fun outweigh racism? Shit like this, like bro, like very untenable impact. That being said, I don't know, like everybody had this in the 1 and 2 when I was in high school. Maybe I'm just like divorced from reality, but I had to include the fun hate. Michigan debate camp, where they teach you this argument.
I don't recall being told fun to impact.
Well, good. Debate is evolving. But yeah, TLDR, every impact besides clash or fairness equals doggy doo-doo. Yes.
What about education?
That is a clash impact.
Okay.
That is the reason why clash is valuable.
Yeah.
So clash is both internal link and impact. Like the reason clash is valuable is because it leads to more educated citizenry. It leads to people who are better able to tell right from wrong, agree, come to conflict resolution. They're more self-reflexive, stuff like this. Other questions? Mm-hmm.
What do you think like the best answer / articulation is to like T is like policing or like hyper controlling the arguments we are allowed to read? Is that just like switch side?
Yes, one, yeah, read on neg, well, maybe not read on neg. Okay, read on neg, this is the one that read on neg doesn't answer it, so let me not go for the read on neg reflex. One, now that I've done this read on neg thing, I've like totally lost my train of thought, so repeat your question. It's like, what is the ATT is policing?
Yeah.
One, T is not policing. To the extent that we have said that you should read a certain argument, we have attached a net benefit to why you should read that argument. So we aren't just saying you should arbitrarily lose for the rationale that we think of certain vision of debate is better. We have said that you should lose because debates under your counter interpretation for the community as a whole would be worse. And to conflate that argument with policing is wrong. It is no different from, initiating a disadvantage argument. It is simply a disagreement with the 1AC. It's like, are judge instruction arguments policing? Like, is initiating like a counterplan policing? No. So any argument that disagrees with the AF does not a priori police. And to the extent that, it has, you have suggested that the content modification that would be, suggested by your interpretation is desirable for debaters that they have identified are valuable. So clash link turns their stuff is another way that you address T equals policing. It's like, why is T policing? Well, because we can't talk about what we want to talk about. And it's like, well, we're not saying you can't talk about what you want to talk about. We're saying you can talk about what you want to talk about in a better format under our counter interpretation. Plus ballot pick, like you can talk about whatever you want, but fairness, so lose. But I don't know, that probably is more policing concern. Additionally, impact inevitable. Last thing, impact inevitable. Nothing about the counterinterpretation redresses policing. And, in fact, the more that the counterinterpretation tries to fit your offense, the less likely that it redresses policing. It's like, why is Topicality policing? Well, because, it emphasizes one vision of debate at the expense of another, but then they're like, counterinterpret shields limits. Like, you can still read the deterrence DA under our counterinterpretation. So it's like, what does their interpretation really do to redress policing? What does the AF do to solve it? And the rationale for why T is policing is debate practices, not topicality. Yeah.
You talked a lot earlier about situations where you should go for topicality when the judge thinks fairness is an impact. What about round robin situations where you don't have kaffs and you end up with one or both judges who have I think topicality is racist in their paradigm?
Then go for the cap K. If they say T is racist, then don't go for T. No shit. That being said, there are a lot of other arguments that you can go for, cap K, and all the arguments that I will discuss now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I might have, I'm not sure. I think I might have signed up for part 2 of this lecture and then part 1.
Interesting. I'll send out the lecture notes for whoever.
Okay.
I have basically typed up exactly what I said for the first hour.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll send it out to the whole email chain. Yeah.
Can you explain the recognition of politics K again? What is it? Why is it so OP against KFs?
It's so OP because it internal link turns the solution that KFs generate, and it's so OP because it's so the impetus towards recognition is so prevalent in critical debate. Understanding the solution to social justice wrongs as receiving a ballot or advancing in the tournament or confronting research in debate, when in reality these are political economic problems that are not simply solved by these minor cosmetic changes, but believing that you have changed the state of debate by advancing in the tournament or by suggesting that debates under your counterinterpretation are better, trains debaters to think that these minor cosmetic changes do make landscape changes in the world and in debate, which is more ineffective for establishing debaters that are willing to confront injustice holistically. So recognition politics is good because it suggests that the AF depoliticizes resistance to what they have said is important to resist, by training debaters to understand solution at the level of minor cosmetic change. Number one example is ballot accumulation K. Yeah.
How does the alt not fall to the same thing? Because it also doesn't do anything. It says we should move on in the tournament instead.
Because you have not suggested that moving on in the tournament solves a social justice issue. You have said we should move on in the tournament because we want to win the debate. So you haven't, suggested, your will to win is connected to something that is like solvent or something about the world. I don't know. That's like somewhat of a ticky-tack answer, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Is this argument not usually run like separately? It's like an add-on to a framework.
Yeah, it can be it is it's definitely not a separate argument. It's a subset of topicality or a subset of Academy K.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
Wait, so you just said it's a subset of Academy K?
Can be, yes. Ballot pick, yeah.
I thought it was a subset of the Cap K earlier.
Recognition politics? Okay, so recognition politics uses the language of the Cap K. It is a Cap K argument. It emanates from that field of research. So yeah, I guess minor addendum. It can also be used for the Cap K and should be used for the Cap K. It can be used for all arguments. You don't need a theoretical basis for the recognition politics K. They said K of debate and then they said we should advance in the tournament. Bro, double turn. You're trying to carve out belonging in a place that you have said is actively hostile towards whatever, minoritarian subjectivity you said should be emphasized in debate. Other questions? Awesome. Okay. Not sure. We'll see. I keep trying to make these predictions on time, and that is literally useless. So I'm just going to keep talking. Academy K is the next argument, plus Academy turn. When should I go for it? / what is the Academy K? You should go for this argument when the 1A overcovers your better position, and as a result, does not justify why this debate is key for the F. You should think of the Academy K as two arguments, ballot pick plus debate key test. All it says is the presumption of the F in the debate format is antithetical to its productive ends. And it can get there in a variety of ways. Actually, I've explained many of the ways. You K'd fairness, but you want the ballot. You K'd the white gaze, but you gave judge instruction to white judges, or you demand coalitional solvency. You K'd debate, but the solution is change debate. Topic focus bad, but here's our topic tie. It's essentially double turn the argument. It translates the AF's research, and suggests something about the AF's research formally is harmful to the AF's ends. Basically, yeah. I just said what I was going to say. Something about the AF's formal presentation is harmful for actualizing the case's benefits. And as a result, it connects to this external cruel optimism impact that I just explained, during questioning, that you believe that you've achieved a thing when you haven't. And as such, you are status quo reifying. Why is this an impact? Well, because the AF purports to redress the status quo. So teaching people to think that they have addressed issues of social justice, teaching people to think that they have redressed racism, have redressed sexism, have redressed transphobia, via whatever they suggested is the solution, is bad because it trains people to think that these are issues no more, essentially. That, you can redress them by making these minor cosmetic changes that I had just explained. Okay, how do you extend and win on the Academy K? Honestly, just explained that during questioning. This argument emphasizes discourse analysis, however, much more than the Cap K. So you need to identify formal disagreements with the AF. You need to identify disagreements with how the AF is presented in the debate and why the debate format is harmful for for the AF solvency. So most often it is like, I think the best version of the Academy K is essentially res pick. It's essentially you critiqued the resolution. You said debates about the resolution are harmful. And then you have a bunch of your AF about the resolution. So which one is it? Should we debate about it or not? It turns the double turn into offense. Their offense is going to be one of two things. Debate advantage plus not talking about our thing is worse. Okay, Academy K straight turns the first argument. This debate key, so debate advantage, debating about our thing is good. Well, your argument is the format of debate is harmful, to solving that thing. So debate advantage doesn't really matter because you're making formal debate K. One such example is Aff education good. One of the most common Academy K arguments is basically like, well, debaters want to win debates. All debaters are competitive. So proposing your Aff in the format in which it is subject to negation is undesirable if the goal is to achieve subjects that are more likely to confront racism. Why? Because you train debaters to answer the racism Aff instead of to confront racism in the real world, right? Debaters are more likely to learn the debate version of the argument. They're more likely to learn how to negate an argument than to engage with it in good faith because of the competitive incentives in debate. You're not incentivized to learn to agree with your opponent. You're incentivized to learn to disagree with your opponent, right? So it takes FYI about world, FYI about debate, floats that as uniqueness, and then says debate bad for achieving their thing. Other response, not talking about our thing is worse. This is why I so heavily emphasize the double turn component of this argument. It is essentially competition bad for their thing plus Aff double turned itself. Reason you want Aff double turned itself. Not talking about our thing equals worse is actually a good argument. Like not talking about racism, obviously that's bad. Like no shit. Like if you don't talk about racism, you're more likely to be racist. Your argument is you can talk about your thing. That being said, the way in which you went about it is harmful to redressing that thing. So it's like not like don't talk about anti-blackness, but the way that you have discussed anti-blackness causes anti-blackness. It teaches debaters to think that, advancing in the tournament or like stuff like this is a solution to anti-blackness, when in reality, that is what causes anti-blackness. Like you can't make the argument debaters backlash to, elite minoritarian debaters and then be like ballot accumulation good. Stuff like this. So last thing to consider, alt. Okay, this is why the Academy K is like very unpopular. The alt for the Academy K is dog. It is so bad. It is awful. You are also in debate. So like obviously you can't be like anything, you can't K form and then do the same formal thing that you've K'd. So this is why the Academy K is best as one of two arguments. Case turn, for reasons that I have just explained, you are identifying a double turn with the Aff. So you do not need an alt, the function of which is to generate uniqueness. They have double turned themselves, is your argument. So you do not need uniqueness for the double turn. They have initiated that. Other thing that you can do is simply say, reject the 1AC. Reject alt. Why? Because the Aff not being read would be more desirable than the Aff being read. That's the Academy K argument. So you don't need, an alt that does something in the world. You're saying doing something in the world in the debate format is bad. So reject alt. That was honestly kind of word salady towards the end, but I think I explained a lot of this during the questioning period. So if there are further questions about this, I'll answer questions about it at the end or via email. But I don't want to keep ranting about this Academy K argument, which is, I'm a big fan of, but is somewhat more difficult to win than other arguments that I'll explain now. Okay, case and case turns. Best neg arg versus kaff besides cap K. Presumption. The affs do nothing. Most kaffs struggle to answer presumption. Why? They have expansive impact arguments and solvency that is disconnected from these impact arguments. They have imperialism equals extraction, and then they have we should change the state of debate, as their solvency. It is unclear how most affs that have these expansive impact arguments and epistemic solvency solve it, so feasibility concern. This returns to feasibility concern that I had previously identified. Or presumption concern for already happened reasons. They have book-based solvency. They are citing examples of things that have occurred in the real world examples of real life social movements, examples of real life performances, of real life literature, books, stuff like that. Well, literature and books are the same thing, but you get the point. Like literature review solvency. You should initiate a presumption argument in every debate. It should not just be ballot, not key, because, I previously said this can be used for better arguments like academy, T, cap K. It should be like, AF needs to explain their departure from the status quo with more than just examples. The more the AF is just examples, the more presumption you've got as well. The more they try to say, well, people in the real world are doing this thing, that reduces the scope of their impact. Like, I have no idea how this is an argument that is AF instead of neg. Every example of AF solvency is something that has already happened. So it is reducing the impact in the real world to a far, far, far greater extent than two debaters showing up at a random high school, on a random weekend will, for these social justice ends. So presumption. AF must explain their departure from the status quo. What about the AF is different from what is being done in the real world? The function of this argument is usually that it zeroes the parts of the AFs that are not about debate. Most AFs, their explanation for why they solve the non-debate part is heavily example-based. It is heavily, we agree with this anti-capitalist social movement that would solve capitalism in the real world, or we agree with this anti-racist social movement that would prevent racism in the real world, right? So presumption for that real world stuff, and then you're just debating the debate impact. And in that world, you have a Bible of arguments that can defeat debate impact, especially topicality and cap K. So presumption, strategic argument to initiate in every debate. Couple terms that I'll talk about before the best one. One, cap good. Get rid of it. This argument sucks. The AF impact turn is way more specific than the negative evidence set. Even if the AF says capitalism is bad, you are showing your hand if you say capitalism is good, that you have nothing to say, and that your coach is bad. The AF impact turn is specific to the AF advantage. They have capitalism bad in the domain that they have said. They have not said capitalism generically bad. They've said capitalism in the medical field is bad. Stuff like this. So cap good equals bad. That being said, versus extra TF, so versus the AFs that claim to, get rid of capitalism, obviously, then you can say it. Like if their AF is just capitalism bad, then obviously you can say it. What do you need for cap good? You need four things. Warming turn, AT cap causes warming. AT cap causes precarity, so AT poverty turn. You need cap solves war, so AT war turn, and then sustainable. Neolib or cap is sustainable.
What was the second one you said?
Precarity, AT poverty turn. Yeah. But I'm not going to talk more about this terrible argument. Okay, moving on. State good and other smaller turns. Good to include. Also show your hand, for the most part. Like state good, like really, like not a very strategic argument. Why? What is the implication of the argument? How does it connect to an impact that outweighs the case? And the AF has K'd this premise in the 1AC usually. So, if you can't get the turn to outweigh the case, then it's not always useful to initiate. They're useful to have, though, to pare down AF solvency and to function as all causes, right? So if, wait, what do I have even typed out? Bruh. This part of the notes is like very bad. I would just say TLDR. State good, not very strategic because they say state bad in the 1AC and connect that to a bigger impact than you will be able to win with state good. And they're more prepared to debate the state good argument than any other argument in debate. It's like when you're a K team in high school, what are you prepping? Okay, framework, AT cap K, AT presumption, 2AC overview, AT state good. Okay. So they're more likely to debate that argument than you are to know why you can explain state good in a way that actually matters. So don't think it's a highly useful argument. Exceptions. when the AF is literally just political hope is bad. When the AF says state bad for 9 minutes, then obviously you need state good. In that world, it's more defense to their impact than it is link turn to their impact. I think that's where you want to be with state good. You want state not irredeemable, not we should approach the state. Defense versus offense. Okay, what is the good impact turn versus kaffs? Humanism is good. Human rights are good. They are desirable. Many kaffs critique humanism, the system of thought that attaches value to human concepts. So think like freedom, the ability to thought, to think, self-possession, human rights, stuff like this. Why is humanism good, right? Two things. One, human rights are desirable. It is bad to suggest that we should evacuate human rights with no conception of how post-human rights politics would address many of the rights that are guaranteed to us internationally or by the government. Think freedom from slavery, freedom of assembly. Internationally you have like right to eat, stuff like this. Right to education. Human rights are desirable. Just because human rights are ineffective does not mean that they are bad. That is a justification for the expansion of human rights. That is a reason why human rights are good. If they are ineffective, the critique of human rights as ineffective does not establish human rights bad. It establishes universalization of human rights as good. Why are human rights bad? Because they are not extended to everyone. What is the solution? Get rid of human rights, get rid of the freedom from slavery, or keep human rights but extend them to everyone. So your alt that says universalize humanism, universalize human rights, usually takes care of K of humanism. Why is humanism good externally from that? Language of the human has historically informed anti-colonial revolt. Book you should read on this question. Gary Wilder, insert book title. I have no idea what the book title is, but if you Google Gary Wilder plus humanism, read that book, and you will understand what I'm talking about. The language of freedom, the language of democracy, the language of human rights. These have been the basis for social movements that confront the issues that the AF is discussing to a far greater effectiveness than the AF has. Basis for the Haitian Revolution. Basis for many civil rights campaigns across the world, like the civil rights movement. Language of freedom, language of democracy. These are helpful concepts for catalyzing a social movement. And to say humans should be free and thinking should be democratic is not inevitably colonial. The language of democracy is the language, like anti-capitalism is pro-democracy, right? Like you're suggesting communism is desirable, so you're saying democracy is good, right? Like not all democracy is inevitably anti-black, is inevitably settler colonial, inevitably subordinates the vast majority of the population to being seen as anti-democratic figures, right? So I'd say humanism good is something that you would want to include. Humanism good for structural reasons though. It's good because equals anti-colonial revolt plus human rights good. Humanism solves extinction, bruh. Like, bruh. I don't even need to explain why that's a bad argument. Death K plus L plus ratio. Okay. DAs. When should I go for a DA? You should go for a DA in one of two situations. One, if the AF has said something is bad and they have to abolish it to solve their impact. Okay. They say nukes are bad. They have nuclear colonialism advantage. They have waste dumping. We test nuclear weapons like in remote areas of the world. Stuff like this. So they have to abolish nukes to solve nuclear colonialism impact. You can never be like, nuclear colonialism is bad, but we solve it via our epistemic change in debate. You're saying literally like fallout is bad. Like how in the world would you solve this, without getting rid of nukes? So if they need to abolish the thing that you're saying is good to solve their impact, that is situation one. Situation two, if the AF is extra topical, DA. If the AF enacts the resolutional question, if it strengthens intellectual property, then you can read a DA to strengthen intellectual property. You can say innovation DA versus KF. It doesn't matter if it has a plan, doesn't have a plan. If it says we should do the resolutional object. If it says we should blow up alliances, obviously you can read deterrence or assurance. What type of DA should I go for? One with an existential impact that is both external and at odds with the case. So these small, you cade tech, so you trade off with the AI that actually solves warming for real DA. These DAs suck. Topic DA with existential impact that disagrees with the case is better. They say bad F, you say econ DA, right? The impact to your DA is not only an impact, in and of itself, but it is also impact turn to ask conception of politics. DAs like deterrence are more strategic than DAs like populism DA because they establish a larger disadvantage to doing the plan's action. Strong DAs also will have internal links that affect AF solvency as well. They have stronger link turns the case and impact turns the case arguments. Econ DA, you have precarity impact connected to that. Like if the economy collapses, obviously more people are going to be poor. Deterrence and assurance DA, you have stuff like China pockets the plan. You have stuff like turns their war impact. So DAs better when they disagree with the case. Requisite argument is 1. You just need a link explanation that is specific to the asked methodology. EV for neg versus KF requirement is low. Nobody is expecting you to have Japan DA versus communism, right? They're expecting you to spin your generic evidence in a way that makes sense as a response to the app. And usually they have given you the link, in a way that minimizes your need to do the link debating. Although, you don't need a set of evidence for derivative communism AF, which deletes alliances, links to assurance. You can win on just generic nuclear assurance or alliances, matter. You don't need a specific piece of evidence. You just need to explain why the plan's mandate gets rid of the condition for your link argument. Other things to consider. 2 things in the 1 and C that you need in every DA speech. 1, extinction first. So you need defense of high magnitude impact. Why? Because most common to AC ATDA, speaking from personal experience, is death K, is high magnitude K. That is the first argument that they have prepared in every debate. Other thing to consider. Rep's defense of your impact. Our prediction about our impact is accurate and it is grounded in objective reality, not personal bias. This gets me to answering the K of the DA, right? So that is the first component of answering the K of the DA, is establishing a rep's defense for your DA. It is establishing why your DA impact is true as opposed to something that is manufactured. The other 3 arguments that you need to answer K of the DA. 1, linked to the status quo. In general, if you learned anything from what I'm saying, uniqueness. KFs have uniqueness problems. K of the DA is usually a description of something that is already unfolding in the real world, arguably to a greater extent than when you read your DA. So it's think China threat K. It's what is worse? What is worse? The fact that both presidents are anti-China, the fact that Trump has historically instituted tariffs on China, or debater number 20 million who has read China War Impact for the weekend reads China War Impact again. What is a greater securitization of China? What is the evidence set that the negative is, reading more likely to be responding to? Your debate speech act or, China, anti-China rhetoric in the real world? Links to the status quo. Okay. 3rd argument. Dispute AF solvency. Impact turn usually disconnected from AF solvency. Honestly, this doesn't really matter in truth because they're turning, your argument. So you've initiated uniqueness for them. That being said, why does this usually matter? Because the impact to it is non-unique. So when paired with links to the status quo, if the aff doesn't solve it, then there's zero chance that it can be, an offensive argument that is leveraged against you. Read this China threat example. Last thing, contest implication. Why does the K of the DA matter? Most K of the DA, the implication is basically small structural impact. Okay, so you have extinction first, you have link turns the case, you have impact turns the case to take care of that. You have a whole bunch of alt cause arguments, uniqueness problems linked to the status quo. You cannot usually explain K of the DA in a way that outweighs the DA. Unless your K of the DA is meant to link turn the DA impact. So think primary security K of the DA. And the other function of these Ks of the DAs is to reduce the DA impact. So like China threat K, like in reality, like one of the better functions is like no US-China war. So the implication of many of these DAs is not as strong as they initially seem. And then, if you're debating death K of the DA, I've already talked about how to answer that. It's, extinction first, structuralize your impact as well. So explain why your impact is not solely a high magnitude one, why it also affects individuals. Which is why I would say always best impact versus K is warming. But future war style impacts are also good as well. So like lethal autonomous weapons, prolif, stuff like this. Yeah, that's DAs. Okay, two more things. One is an argument, and then I'm going to talk mentality really quick. Picks and counterplans. When should I go for picks? If you suck. If the opposing team drops it, and if you have a good judge, then you should go for a pick. IMO, picks are dog. They are low quality arguments. Why? The solvency function of them is borderline impossible to explain. If you have a pick that is a significant enough disagreement with the aff to constitute a disadvantage to the plan. So to constitute an internal net benefit that doing the pick, addresses, but doing the plan alone causes. Then the solvency for the pick makes literally no sense. Like, if you have a DA, then how does do the plan minus this very important thing solve any of the advantage? Very difficult to explain the solvency. So I would say, if they drop it, it's really when you want to go for a pick. What even is a pick? It is disagreement with small part of the plan plus do rest of the plan. Most popular ones are three types. It is pick out of the ballot, which I've already explained is better said as Academy K or T or Cap. So you got Academy K or Gaze pick. And then you got pick out of some word is also a common one. So capital B blackness pick is an example. Disagreement with minor cosmetic thing in the 1AC. Best pick though is you K'd something and we have a DA to that thing. So the example that I always give is my freshman year NDT got this aff cut for me that was get rid of imperialism everywhere in the world. And one line example is from some place to Diego Garcia. There is imperialism on Diego Garcia. Georgetown is what's your defense of this critique of Diego Garcia? I'm bruh, I literally don't know what that is. At this point, I'm thinking it's a person, right? This is actually an island military base. I come to find out because we got wrecked on deterrence DA of Diego Garcia, right? So these picks, where it is you actually have a DA to something that they said is good or is bad, that is when you can read pick, right? That being said, what the hell is the solvency for the pick? How do you solve imperialism if you're saying military-based pick? Duh. So really, 9 times out of 10, pick is better served as just DA or case turn. If you can kick the counterplan and go for the internal net benefit alone, that is best. And this is especially good when it becomes a case argument that the 2NR has to deal with. Okay, picks I've said are bad. Counterplans, though, very good. Very good. Obviously not versus debate impact. And obviously not counterplans that are like poorly worded. So like counterplan out of their impact. Like counterplan, like confront, like, you know, the denial of entanglement. Stuff like this. Like, what are you even talking about? That being said, advantage counterplan to solve high magnitude impact, devastating. Like K teams are so unprepared to answer these arguments. How do I know this? Because I was a K team and I was very, very bad versus these arguments. Okay. Extra T Fs are notoriously weak at explaining AF solvency meaningfully. Counterplan, as a result, the counterplan is more likely to solve. And it is more difficult for the AF to explain AF solvency versus counterplan solvency. So I guess what I just said was like kind of a non sequitur. Like AF solvency being bad doesn't mean the counterplan is more likely to solve. That being said, it is more likely that you are able to win comparatively, that the counterplan solves better than the AF as a result of this solvency differential thing. Other reason why, you know, being bad at explaining AF solvency meaningfully equals bad for the extra T team is it is more difficult to explain and prepare solvency deficit. So advantage counterplan that tries to solve the advantage plus DA to the topic is strategic. You force the AF to explain their two weakest things. AF solvency plus topic tie, right? If you have topic DA, it forces them to explain what their K of the topic is as the link turn or impact turn to that disadvantage. And you need to remember that they need to win an impact that outweighs the impact to the disadvantage for this to matter, right? So counterplans, very, very good. Advantage counterplan, good. Topic counterplan plus topic DA, also good. Okay, so that is all the argument stuff that I have to talk about. Last thing I'll talk about is mentality. Okay, first thing I'll say, ethos. Ethos. Can't teach it, but it does matter. The most relevant determinant of neg versus kf is positive mentality plus good ethos. If you sound good and like you are controlling the debate, 9 times out of 10, you will win the debate in clash debates. Why? The evaluation of critical arguments is highly, highly subjective. All debate arguments are subjective. You do not ever need to win a debate. You just need to convince the judge that you won the debate. That being said, the evaluation of critical arguments is way, way more subjective. And most debaters lose confidence when they are neg versus k because most debaters are obsessed with, having the moral high ground. Having the moral high ground is irrelevant to the likelihood of your victory. You should approach neg versus kf no different than neg versus policy f. If you come into the debate, with fear, if you come into the debate with little confidence, obviously you're going to lose. Flip side of this, don't be an asshole. Nobody cares about your personal 14-year-old opinions about debate or which model of debate is preferable. So the flip side of confidence is overconfidence. The more you talk about your personal beliefs versus K, the more likely that you are to lose to you were racist or you did something in the debate that is wrong. In line with L2, you are racist, de-emphasize cancellation. You are not canceled if you lose neg versus KF. So many people get way too worked up when they lose versus K. Like, it's no different than losing versus policy. You lost in both ways. Like, why is it different? If you lost on K of something you said in the debate, you are not canceled, bro. You are like 14 years old. It will make you a worse person and a worse debater if you retreat within and feel like you're walking on eggshells every time you engage with somebody who is discussing social justice. It makes you somebody who is more likely to be, a recluse when it comes to these matters that are actually extremely important, arguably more important than whatever you think is important about intellectual property. So if you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around K debaters, that is a sign you need to work on yourself as a person. Additionally, if you externalize blame at a model of debate or a group of people for your inability to, defeat the opposing team's arguments or the biases of a judge, you are a Johner. You should get over it. You are learning every day. So you should de-emphasize the idea that if you lose neg VK, that this matters, or that people care, or that people see that you lost neg VK, and that signifies that you are a racist. Like, nobody cares about debate in the real world, and most debaters don't even care about other debaters. So, like, why are you going to feel like you're such a bad person because you lost neg VK? Like, if you get, K'd in debate for something that you did, then simply learn from that L and move on and don't replicate it in the future. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. All arguments are relative in debate. And most of the stuff is not intentional. That being said, if you do stuff intentionally because you hate K teams, then quit because you suck. Last thing I'll say, one position versus options. Previously discussed this idea, really quickly gonna hit on it and then take questions. Specialize in one position as the 2N, but retain options, aka make your 1N figure out one thing that you really don't want to figure out that can also be strategic. Reason it is so important is because it allows you to maximize control and to streamline prep. Pre-round for neg VK is notoriously scramble prone. I have explained this at length previously. So reducing uncertainty via argument specialization is helpful. And, it does not matter, it does not matter if you specialize in one position. Many people are like, well, if I go for T only, they're gonna know I go for T. What are they gonna do? Cut new ATT in the pre-round? Like new AT, your version of the cap K in the pre-round? Like, obviously not. Obviously not. So this prep differential misnomer is exactly that. It is a misnomer. You should just go for one thing and you should prep accordingly. If you wanna go for the cap K, prep judges that are amenable to voting for the cap K. If you wanna go for T, prep judges that hate KFs. If you wanna go for a DA, go for a DA. I don't know. You can't really prep judges for a DA. That's more specific on the case. But you get the point. TLDR, specialize in one thing. That one thing, what should it be? T or the cap K? TBH. And also, if you lose to KF, nobody cares. Get over it. That's all I have to say.